I used to work in the meat department at Walmart back when I was finishing up college. I hated that job so much, but they were helping me pay for school and were flexible with my schedule, so I just sucked it up and got through it. By this point, I had been working there for about 3.5 years, so I was basically in charge of everything that went on in the meat department. I was pretty laid back as a supervisor. As long as the work got done, I didn't really care about much else. As you can tell, I was super enthusiastic about my job. Anyways, since I was in school at the time, my shift schedule was typically later in the day, especially on weekdays. I worked from 4 to 10 p.m. It was usually pretty busy during the first half of my shift, but after about 8, it really started to die down. I also usually had 1 or 2 other people back there working with me at a time. Once it starts to get slow, one of our responsibilities is to unpackage some of the product in the back and put it in the freezer back there for the next shift in the morning. Most of the time, I will just do this by myself, since I've done it so many times. The other person working with me would be up front taking any late night customer orders. So, I went back to the back section and started taking various meats and put them in the freezer. I had made my first trip and walked out of the big freezer and back into the main section and realized that the back door was slightly cracked open. I almost didn't even notice it. We use this door pretty often for taking out trash and things like that. I stopped what I was doing and opened the door fully and peered out. I didn't see anyone outside, so I shut the door and walked back to the front. The employee I was working with was still up there. I asked him if he'd gone out the back door any time during the shift, and he said he hadn't. I thought that someone had forgotten to close it, possibly during the shift before mine, and we just hadn't noticed until that point. I was just glad my boss didn't find out about it, because one time someone left the back door open and it became a huge deal. So I just made sure to shut it and continued on restocking the fridge. There's a bunch of racks in the fridge where we set the meat on. You can see through the racks to the other side. The racks also have wheels on them, so they're pretty easy to move around. I was placing product on one of the lower shelves, so I squatted down to slide it into the slot. I saw a person's eye directly on the other side of the rack, staring right at me. I got up quickly and ran out of the freezer and back up to the front. I went up front and told the other employee working to come back with me. We walked to the back room together, and the back door was now wide open. I ran over quickly to shut it and lock it. Both of us went into the freezer and looked around for anyone, but it was empty. The person had left through the door when I went back up to the front. Someone must have left the door open during first shift and forgotten to close it, making an easy entrance for this random person to just walk through. I work at a pretty well-known superstore. I've been there for a while now, and have basically done every job in the store. I didn't really have one specific department that I work in. My boss puts me at wherever department needs help for the shift. The one department of the store that I basically never worked in was the electronics. It just so happened that on this particular day, they needed help over at electronics, so I was tasked with working over there. I wasn't too happy about it. That department was always busy, and I wouldn't be of much help to customers over there. I don't really know a whole lot about video games, and really only know the basics about phones, laptops, tablets, etc. Anyways, I didn't have a choice, and I was in charge of working the desk over in the electronics section. Fortunately for me, it didn't seem like the store was too busy today. I was hoping it would stay that way, and it would be a pretty easy shift. About halfway through, a middle-aged man approached me and asked me a question about the availability of a specific video game. I don't even remember which one he asked about. I walked with him over to the video games, and it didn't appear that that specific video game was on the shelf. I told him that we might have a copy in the back, but that I'd have to get someone else over here to go look. Surprisingly, he didn't seem to like that response and was visibly annoyed with me. I apologized and told him that he could talk to the manager about it. I honestly would have preferred that, because they would have known more about it than I do. He ended up just turning and walking away from me pretty much mid-sentence. I just went back to my place behind the desk. You have to deal with people like that from time to time, and I really did try to do what I could to help, but he didn't like any of my suggestions. I was checking people out and helping other customers with basic questions they had, when I noticed the same man from earlier across the aisle behind one of the clothing shelves. His whole body was covered, and you could only see half his head, but I still recognized him. He was looking right over in my direction, and when he noticed that I saw him, he disappeared behind the shelf. This happened at least 3 more times during my shift, except every time he was behind a different shelf. Like one time, he was directly to the left of me by the toys. It was starting to kind of creep me out. It had been hours at this point. You'd think that he would have been done shopping by that point. It was now the end of my shift, so I clocked out and began making my way toward the parking lot to head home. I got outside and to my car. I was unlocking it, and for whatever reason, I had the urge to look back toward the store. I saw that man again, walking fastly toward me. He wasn't running, but he was gaining quickly, and he was clearly coming toward me. I threw open the car door and sped out of there. I got home, still breathing pretty heavy from the whole thing. Fortunately, I wasn't followed. The next day at work, I told my boss about what had happened. She said they would take a look at the security cameras, but ultimately, there wasn't a whole lot that they could do. I haven't seen that guy since, at least to my knowledge. I still work there, but nowadays, I spend most of my time in the back of the store, rarely interacting with customers. I was out looking for a present for my mom for her birthday. My family never gives each other anything super expensive for birthdays, but hers was coming up, and I needed to get something for her. I went to Target and began looking for something to get for my mom. I ended up finding a really cool coffee mug that I thought would be perfect. I picked it up off the shelf and turned the corner of the aisle. When I did, I literally ran right into someone, almost dropping the mug. It was a man, maybe 50 years old. I said I was sorry and kinda laughed about it. He chuckled too, but didn't say anything in response. I moved on now, and went up to the front to check out. I eventually got out of there and went back home. My mom's birthday was the following day, and I'd give her her gift at dinner when my family would all meet up to celebrate. I live alone in a pretty moderate-sized house. Fast forward to that night, and I had just laid down in bed, ready to go to sleep. Not even 5 minutes later, there was a loud thump at my window. It sounded like a rock or something had been thrown at it. I didn't move. I just chose to ignore it. But it happened again. I ignored it once again, but it kept going on, happening at least 3 more times. Eventually, I'd had enough, and I got out of bed and lifted up the blinds to look outside. I didn't notice anyone out there, but I did notice a car that I didn't recognize parked across the street from my house. I was pretty sure that car hadn't been there when I had gotten home from Target earlier. It's pretty unusual to have cars parked on the street in my neighborhood. I considered calling my neighbor across the street, who I was pretty close with, to ask if they knew whose car it was. But it was around midnight at this point, and calling them would just be ridiculous. I was downstairs in the living room at this point, when I heard a huge bang on the glass come from the living room window. The blinds were shut, so I couldn't see anything outside. It kinda sounded like someone's hand being smacked up against the glass. I turned on my front porch light and contemplated what to do next. I finally summoned up the courage to lift up the blinds to the window and look outside. I already kind of knew what I was about to see, but nothing could prepare me for the horror I felt as I lifted up the blinds and saw someone standing right on the other side of the glass. When he noticed me, he began waving at me, which made the whole thing even more disturbing. In the brief 5 seconds I saw of him, I recognized him to be the same guy that I had bumped into at Target earlier. He must have followed me home, and I didn't even notice. I called the police, and someone showed up rather quickly. Of course, by the time they got there, the man and the car across the street were gone. I gave as best of a description as I could, but there wasn't too much that they could do. They just suggested getting some cameras and making sure my doors and windows stay locked. This was about 6 months ago, and I haven't seen the man since.